Hi guys, Grand J here and welcome to another one of our videos. Today we'll be talking about the new water cards of Opus 5. So the first card is Andoria. It's a 2-cost backup. When a party you control deals damage to your opponent, draw 1 card. So this card is a very similar card that we've seen in Opus 1, which is like the 2-cost mime. So yeah, when your party deals damage to your opponent, draw a card. So there's an interesting aspect about this card is that typically when you party attack, you're doing it because you have multiple forwards that are smaller than your opponent's larger forward. So let's say if you have 2 forwards that are around 6,000, 7,000 power each, and your opponent has a forward that's 8,000 power, you typically at that point party attack 2 of your guys, which case your opponent has to make the decision of whether they want to receive that damage or whether they want to trade their 8,000 power forward against one of your smaller guys. Generally, when you do party attack, the defender will only generally be able to take out one of your attackers, so it allows your party of smaller guys to get through or get over a larger power forward. So Andoria does sort of like work into this in that if your party does party attack, your opponent now has a much more difficult decision to make, because typically when you do party attack, you generally don't have very many party attacks that you can do during a turn, typically 1 or 2 maximum, in which case usually most players will tend to opt to receive the damage as opposed to trading one of their large guys for one of their opponent's smaller guys on block. So actually this card has a reasonable usage to it, and its value is actually pretty decent. So definitely in a more like swarmier sort of smaller water deck, an argument can be made for this card. So your opponent typically probably doesn't want to allow you to draw an extra card. Generally, it's never a good idea. So your opponent has to make some really tough decisions about whether they want to take bad blocks or whether they want to allow you to draw a card. So this card is actually not bad, but it does tend to build more towards a sort of smaller, weenier type deck. Next we have Rustler. It's a 5-cost forward at 8,000 power, so it's a bit below the curve, but if you control a card named Ash, the cost of playing Rustler on the field is reduced by 2. If Rustler receives damage, reduce the damage by 1,000, and if a card named Ash you control receives damage, reduce the damage by 2,000 instead. So this is another card that just pairs up with Ash. It seems that despite this set and the new side deck seeming to want to push Sky Pirates in FF12, seems like a large theme is about buffing Ash and making her a lot better. So Rustler is one of the new cards that does work with Ash, and he's a very good card. So he goes down to a 3-cost 8,000 power forward while you have an Ash on the field. So that's actually a very good good cost ratio. Plus, typically a lot of water cards tend to be able to buff your water forwards as well. So this guy will be able to get to 8,000, 9,000, 10,000 pretty easily within the water package itself. And the ability to reduce damage it receives by 1,000 is actually really good. If you just have something like a Walker out, this guy's going to be 9,000 power, and just him by himself, he's going to reduce all damage dealt to him by 1,000. So it means that your opponent has to deal a packet of 10,000 damage in order to kill him outright. So this guy's going to be very resilient. Even without any sort of combat or power buffs, having 8,000 power is very good, plus that additional 1,000 damage reduction does allow him to survive a lot of combat even by himself. So this card is a very good card. Plus, just as a little like added benefit on top, it does make your Ash receive 2,000 less damage every time she receives damage. Now Ash has a lot of support this set, so between Rustler and the new card Rustler, yeah, Ash is going to be really difficult to kill, and Rustler just basically allows Ash to just sustain more combat damage as well. And if you do combine this with a Minwu, then it makes Ash basically not receive any damage from any source at all whatsoever. Next we have Aria. It's a 4-cost backup EX burst. When Aria enters the field, search for a 1-drop Warrior Light forward and add it to your hand. So this is a very strong card. Yeah, there's quite a lot of Warrior Lights from this set. So there are a whole bunch of those 3-cost Warrior Lights that all give each other plus 1,000 power, as well as the new wall that in Earth and in Light, as well as all the previous Warrior Lights that we had, such as Warrior Light. So this card has a lot of targets. Typically, you will be playing it in the Warrior of Light deck. But that being said, without being played in a Warrior Light deck, there are some reasonable targets as well in the form of Raffi, and Water also has occasionally in the past played Warrior Light, the 4-cost forward, because it does synergize with Minwu so well. So yeah, so an argument can be made to play this card in a mono water deck, but definitely in a Warrior Light deck, this is exactly where it's supposed to fit, and it's a very good card. Searching out the exact forward that you need, as well as EX burst, is fantastic. Next is Ozma. It's one of those cards that was spoiled earlier on. It's a 5-cost monster, so pay 0 until the end of turn. Ozma also becomes a forward with 8,000 power, and Ozma doesn't receive damage from dark cards. You can only use this ability once per turn. In addition to this, it's got Flare Star, so S, blue, 2 dull. All forwards an opponent controls lose 2,000 power for each CP required to play them until the end of the turn. You can only use this ability if Ozma is a forward. So, because of this limitation, Ozma can't use its S ability on the same turn it enters play, because even though you can transform it into a forward straight away, it can't use its dull special ability on the same turn. So there is a limitation to that. But because he's a monster and he's a high cost monster, he's generally going to be pretty safe. Yeah, typically there's not many cards that can destroy 5 cost monsters except for in Wind. So generally Ozma is going to be pretty safe while he is a monster. Making him into an 8,000 power forward is a little bit expensive considering you are paying 5 CP for this monster, and its ability of not receiving damage from dark cards is a very niche type ability. So first of all, like one of the most common dark type cards in the game, the Emperor, yeah, when Emperor's on the field, you can't even use its ability to transform it into a forward. So Ozma isn't able to really take advantage of this ability while Emperor's on the field. So the other cards that you might see in dark would be Camelnaut or Eldnarch. So Camelnaut has seen play in certain lists, especially lists that play Star Sybil, but Camelnaut has the ability to change his color as well, or change his element. So Ozma won't be able to effectively deal with him after Camelnaut has changed his ability, which really leaves just like a couple of targets such as Shadow Lord or Eldnarch, and those aren't particularly very common forwards that you might deal with. So Ozma's first ability, in terms of like making it like immune to dark forwards, is a effect that you generally won't be able to take advantage of. In terms of its second ability, Flare Star, reducing all opponents' forwards 2,000 power for each CP that they cost, is actually very good. Basically, anything that's 4 costs above is basically just going to instantly break. So yeah, it's a card that penalizes very heavily larger forward. It is quite a costly effect though. It does effectively cost 6 CP because you are discarding a card and paying 4 CP to do it, as well as dulling it. So it is quite an expensive ability. The fact that it is a monster does mean it's reasonably easy to search out, as well as being an FF9 character means that Steiner is able to search it. So this card is actually pretty easy to search out if you do want to use this ability. So yeah, potentially an argument can be made for this card, especially in Water that doesn't have a lot of removal for larger forwards, and Ozma does potentially offer that ability. Next we have Ondor. It's a 2-cost backup. Choose one category, so for Dull, choose one category 12 forward you control. It gains plus 1,000 power until the end of turn. So this card is pretty solid, but definitely only fits into typically a Final Fantasy 12 deck. So the cards that we have right now that do fall into this category are your Sky Pirates, Ash, Bash, Alcid, and I think that's pretty much the most of the targets that you'll be seeing with Ondor. So yeah, so the targets that you can hit are a little bit more niche. But yeah, if he does fall into a Water Lightning deck or a Water Wind deck, there are quite a lot of targets for Ondor to use on. And yeah, the fact that it's a 2-cost backup that requires no CP to use abilities is actually a pretty like cheap and quite efficient way to benefit your forwards. So yeah, definitely if you are building a deck, and typically most Water decks will run at least like 1 or 2 copies of Ash, and almost all Lightning decks will use Alcid. So an argument can be made that yeah, if you do happen to have quite a few targets that are like FF12, then Ondor is a great card to add into those decks just as an extra boost available here or there. Next, we have one of the Water legendaries of the set. We have Cloud of Darkness. It is a 5-cost forward at 8,000 power, so it's a bit below the curve. But when Cloud of Darkness enters the field, choose on forward opponent controls, it loses 2,000 power for each forward you control until the end of turn. When Cloud of Darkness attacks, choose one forward and opponent controls, it loses 1,000 power for each forward you control until the end of turn. So this card is very similar to Cagnazzo that we've seen from previous sets. Now Cagnazzo has been a very popular card, especially typically in mono Water decks, because it's able to give board wipe debuffs to your opponent's forwards, and it's actually quite a powerful debuff on your opponent. Cloud of Darkness is a more narrow type ability, so it does only choose one forward, but it is on interplay as well as attacking, and its body's a little bit stronger, even though it does cost a little bit more. Now, Cloud of Darkness doesn't really sort of impress me all that much. So if you do consider its ability to reduce a forward by a certain amount of power, if you have multiple forwards on the field, that's when you're going to get most value out of your Cloud of Darkness. So you'll need 3 other forwards on the field, then play Cloud of Darkness in order to be able to completely destroy opponent's forwards at 8,000 power or less. And then, yeah, whenever it attacks, it only reduces a forward by 1,000 power. So typically, you're not going to be killing a forward when it does attack. It just allows, it just makes it very difficult for your opponent to block. So Cloud of Darkness, to me, doesn't seem like a removal ability. It seems more like as a tempo play to play it down and basically allow your forwards to swing through. That being said, though, it's not one of the better cards to do that. There are plenty of ways to reduce your opponent's forwards power and also buff your own forwards power in water as well. Whether it's in something like Korilla, whether it's something in Titus, or something like Theodore. There's plenty of water cards that do buff your forwards, and if you want a like a larger debuff on your opponent so you can tackle through with multiple forwards, Cagnazzo generally gives a larger debuff and also allows more of your forwards to attack through. Cagnazzo is also like typically a better blocker as well. So in most of the cases, Cagnazzo is going to be your go-to play. Also, Cagnazzo, if you do combine it with Scholar, typically will allow you to board wipe your opponent as well, whereas Cloud of Darkness does not. The drawback is Cagnazzo generally needs more setup in that you need multiple backups, multiple forwards, but Cloud of Darkness doesn't require you to have a large amount of backups. That being said, though, you're generally not going to be playing Cloud of Darkness unless you have a lot of forwards on the field, which typically means you also happen to have a lot of backups on the field as well. So Cloud of Darkness is very iffy card. The fact that it doesn't specify the color of your forwards or the element of your forwards means that I do believe it's typically going to see more play in a multicolor deck. Potentially, if you do after you resolve some sort of card that plays a lot of guys on the field, such as an Alcid or potentially like a Golbez, a Cloud Darkness becomes significantly stronger because it doesn't have to lock to a certain. You don't have to lock yourself into a specific deck color, and you happen to have a lot of forwards on field. So definitely, in sort of more swarmier decks, then Cloud Darkness will probably see some play. Next, we have Korilla, and this is one of the cards I got to spoil before the set. It's a 4-cost forward at 7,000 power. It's a knight, so there's quite a lot of knights this set. So we have reached this fun critical mass of the Lightning Water Knights deck being viable. So yeah, I am working on a deck list for that, and I'll have that video out to you guys pretty soon, hopefully before the end of the weekend. But yeah, so Korilla, whenever she when she comes into play, no, when he comes into play, no, she, no, I was right, she. Whenever she comes into play or attacks, choose one water forward you control against plus 2,000 power until the end of turn. So yeah, so in terms of its buff, not particularly amazing. Titus typically is a little bit better in that he's able to give all your forwards plus 1,000 power, whereas Korilla is only able to give one forward plus 2,000, and its base power is a little bit lower. That being said, it is a knight, so there are benefits to that. In that Clady allows you to reactivate them, Ophelia allows you to buff them, and Duke Altano allows you to search for them as well. So there are some very nice knight synergies. So yeah, so an argument can be made for Korilla as a knight. Or as a 4-cost forward. Next, it's also got an S ability. So Savage Blade is S blue dull. Choose one forward, deal at 7,000 damage. If you control a card named Trion, deal at 9,000 damage instead. Now, so yeah, so the thing about this is that water typically doesn't have removal, like at least damage type removal. So it does have ways to bounce your opponents forwards and reduce their power, but it doesn't have many effects to like permanently remove a forward on the field by destroying it or by dealing it damage. So water struggles really hard with that, and Korilla actually fills a very nice issue that water decks might have, in the sense that it is able to deal damage. 7,000 damage is a respectable amount of damage, and for S blue dull, it's actually pretty well costed. If you control Trion, it deals an extra 2,000 damage instead. So that's a very nice bump in damage. 9,000 damage is going to be able to generally take up most 5-cost forwards and generally anything below. So that's actually a very good benefit for playing Trion. And Trion does build into Knight's deck as well. So it just like, it's an archetype that really sort of synergizes with itself. And there's a lot of reasons to sort of build it. So really excited to try out Knight's deck. And I'm going to show you guys how fun this deck could be. Talking about Clady, it is a 2-cost backup that's got dull, choose one Prince forward or job Knight forward and activate it. So in terms of Knights, we have like plenty of Knights in both water and lightning. So yeah, so amongst the water Knights, we have stuff like Agrias, we have the FF9 Knights in Steiner and Beatrix. We have Trion and and Korilla. So we got a whole bunch of like new knights in the game, and of course we got Ramza and the FFT knights as well. So Clady actually has a lot of targets. In terms of princes, I did look this up. There only is one prince forward in the game at the moment, and that is Gordon. So it's at 2 costs forward from Opus 1. So Clady has quite a lot of targets that she can't reactivate. It is a cheap effect to do it, so all you have to do is dull, so you don't have to spend any CP. So in that regard, it's actually a very, very cheap backup to use to reactivate your forwards, and like reactivating your forwards, especially in any deck where you're going to be quite aggressive, and knights generally tend to be aggressive attacking type forwards. Yeah, being able to reactivate them is really, really strong. Yeah, and this combined with another card, Destin, that we spoke about in our Lightning set review, reduces Clady's cost by 1, so she does become a 1 cost backup. So she becomes very cheap to put in. But yeah, if you don't have the Destin, putting her in for 2 CP on the first turn is actually very fine as well. And yeah, she's got a very good ability that you don't have to pay CP for. So imagine those times where previously you've had to pay a lot of CP to use Astrologian actually, to reactivate your forwards. This card will allow you to do the same thing for your knights, but you don't have to pay 2 blue CP in order to do it. Next, we got Schrodinger. It is a 2-cost monster that is, it's actually a non-unique monster, actually. So I actually originally thought this might have been a unique monster, but no, you can have multiple copies of this monster on the field. So it's got an interesting effect in that when Schrodinger enters the field, reveal the top card of your deck. If it is a forward, draw 1 card. If it is a backup, select 1 character in your break zone and add it to your hand. If it is a monster, your opponent selects 1 forward he or she controls and returns it to their hand. If it is summoned, draw 2 cards. And then yeah, otherwise this monster doesn't really do anything else. And in regards to cards, in regard to the card that you reveal from top of the deck, you then just put it to the top of the deck. Yeah, so once you resolve, if you have to draw 1 card or draw 2 cards, you would end up drawing that card as well. So yeah, so this is a interesting monster in that it, by itself, it actually doesn't really, so after it has its interplay ability, it actually doesn't do anything. So it doesn't have an ongoing ability, it can't transform into a forward, it just is a monster that's going to sit there. So there's a couple of reasons why you can use a card like this. So this card is typically what is considered something like an engine card. So this card doesn't inherently do anything, right? But the fact that it creates a monster for like a very low amount of resources, or potentially positive amount of resources if you do hit a summon, means that it means that you can combine this with effects that do allow you to make use of monsters, or make buffs, or use your monsters as resources. So like monster type decks such as Gao. So this is just a monster that you can have on the field, and it buffs Gao passively. Also, if you're playing something like Kefka or Realm, transforming Schrodinger into a forward using another ability allows it to turn into a body, and it was a monster that inherently didn't really cost that much, and it sort of gave you resources as well. Also, there are interesting combinations of this card. So if you do happen to combo this card with Ephemeral Summoner, so if you play Ephemeral Summoner first, allows you to put a water summon to the top of your deck, so you're guaranteed when you play Schrodinger to be able to get a water summon. So in effect, you're basically able to completely remove the cost of Schrodinger by combining it with Ephemeral Summoner. So in that regard, that's a very nice combo to use as well, to search for specific water summons that you need, and also to draw some cards. So this card, like, inherently by itself doesn't do anything, but it is exactly what like a combo player is looking for, in the sense that anytime that they can find a use for this basically free or low cost resource, this is exactly a great card to put into it. Like another card that you can sort of combine it with is the Opus 4 Earth Kefka, where you have to sacrifice 3 forwards of 3 monsters in order to put it in for free. Schrodinger is just like another monster that you can put in, that you can sacrifice very easily for Kefka. So it's a very fun card. Potentially we might see a competitive deck that uses this in combination with monsters, and I'm really excited to try it out. Next, we have Tombury. It is a 1-cost monster, and it is another one of those auto-trigger monsters from this set. So when a character an opponent controls searches for 1 or more cards, put Tombury into a break zone if you do break that character. So there are really sort of 2 cards that you will see, 2 types of cards that you will see that Tombury will trigger off. So one would be backups that search deck for cards. So typically most of those backups are the 3-cost backups that do search for a forward of a specific category. When your opponent plays one of those and you break it with Tombury, you have really technically broken even, in the sense that typically those backups cost 3 CP, but they get 1 card back. So they're effectively 1 CP backups. And Tombury is a 1 CP monster. So you're spending 1 CP on a monster to destroy your opponent's backup that they pay 1 CP for. So you come out on parity with that. Now there is a downside, in the sense that if your opponent has multiple of those search backups, them playing one early on and then it getting broken by Tombri allows them to play another one later on in the game. So its downside is that your opponent, if they use a search backup, it does clear it out so they can play another one later on. But that being said, it does break one of your opponent's backups, so it does slow your opponent's resource building game down a little bit. The part where the way that this card becomes really, really good is any of those 5-cost forwards, or like typically like higher cost forwards that do search the deck for a forward when they come into play. So cards like Setzer, cards like Edgar, cards like Steiner, these are all cards that when they come into play, they search a deck for a forward or a character card, and Tombri triggering off one of those is actually really, really good value. It doesn't stop your opponent from searching for the card, but being able to trade your 1 CP monster for a forward that effectively end up costing 3 CP is actually really, really good. So yeah, so Tombri is one of those cards that's generally going to be better in the mid game rather than the early game, because during the early game he'll probably end up breaking a backup, but around the mid game, if you do put it down, your opponent's going to find it very difficult to play stuff like Schneider, play stuff like Setzer, because it's going to trade off against a Tombri. That being said though, this is one of those abilities that's particularly more niche. So whereas the other auto trigger abilities such as Grenade, such as Black Knight, they're going to trigger every game because it's very easy to, so your opponent's very likely to play a forward that costs 4 or less, or play a forward that costs that's got 8,000 or less power. Those are going to trigger off very easily, but Tombri, you might find yourself sometimes having it on the field and your opponent's not going to be able to trigger it, and you're not really sort of getting value out of this card for quite some time. So it is a more niche type ability. So because of that, I think that its use is a little bit too narrow. Even though Water has a lot of monster support, I don't think that this is going to be one of those go-to monsters that Water is going to want in their deck. Next, we got Canis. We've talked about this a little bit earlier. It's a 2-cost forward at 4,000 power. For dull, choose 1 water forward against plus 1,000 power until the end of turn. And for water 1 dull, choose 1 forward, loses 3,000 power until the end of turn. So yes, it is a 2-cost forward, so there are some synergies with it in the form of Lena. You can play it out for free. And yes, it does buff your forwards or debuff opponent forwards for a certain amount of cost. That being said though, it is a 4,000 power forward, so it's not going to be winning any fights. And typically, if you are getting a forward with Lena, you're generally going to want something a little bit stronger, whether it's a Fame Mugogo or a Knight, or even something that's good on defense, such as Ephemeral Summon is pretty solid as well. So Arcanus generally doesn't, is kind of outshone by a lot of other targets, and because of that, I don't really sort of foresee Arcanus seeing any sort of play. Next, we got Batteron. It is a 4-cost backup. When Batteron enters the field, look at the top 4 cards of your deck, add one of those cards into your hand, and return the other cards to the bottom of your deck in any order. So this card is another one of those effectively 2 CP backups that sort of does some sort of searching or does some sort of filtering. There's quite a lot of these cards in War already. So we got Batteron, we got Artemishon, we've got Merlwib. So all these cards effectively have a very similar effect in that they cost, they're a 2 CP backup that does some sort of searching, some sort of filtering. So that means Water now has quite a number of 2 CP backups that they can play on turn 1 to improve their hand. So Water now seems to be the color that you need to really play in order to play any sort of combo deck, especially any sort of combo deck that does tend to run a lot of light or dark cards, simply because you need to filter through your deck, or any sort of combo deck where you're looking for specific targets. So yeah, this is actually a pretty solid card for that archetype. Looking at top 4 cards, it's like a lot of cards that you get to reveal, and picking one of those cards out is generally like at least one of them is going to be pretty good for your setup or pretty good for the current situation. So this card's actually pretty solid. And yeah, so the only bad part is that Water has quite a lot of powerful ongoing type water backups, so it's going to be struggling to find a backup slot. That's the only sort of difficult thing about the water backups, in that there's quite a lot of them that are very good. But yeah, so if you are looking for ways to hedge up your more situational or less consistent deck, then Batteron is actually a pretty good way for you to do it. Next, we got Bismarck, and it is one of the water summons for the set. It's a 2-cost summon. Select one of the following 3 actions. Choose 1 monster, return it to its owner's hand. Choose 1 character you control, return it to its owner's hand. Choose 1 forward, halve its power until the end of the turn, round down to the nearest 1,000. So to clarify in regards to the third ability of choose a forward, halve its power, brackets round down to the nearest 1,000, it means that the power ends up on, or really like reduce the forward's power by half, and round that half up. So basically, the forward's power, make it 1,000 less. then rounding it down halfway. So if the forward is a 9,000 power forward, after halving it, you round it down from 4,000, like 4,500 to 4,000. So yeah, 9,000 goes to 4,000, 7,000 goes to 3,000. So round it down an extra 1,000. So yeah, so that's what so just to clarify for the third ability. So this summon's actually pretty solid in my mind. So no, it doesn't have EX burst, which is the only real downside to this card. At 2 CP, halving a forward's power is actually very strong. If you compare that to Choo Lane, the Impure, it's yeah, so effectively these cards have very similar type abilities in that Choo Lane will generally reduce a forward's power by somewhere along the lines of like 2,000 to 5,000 power, depending on the situation. Yeah, and it draws you a card, so effectively it kind of makes that a 2 CP summon as well. But the plus side is that it is a EX burst. Whereas Bismarck, yeah, it's not an EX burst, but you're more consistently able to put a relevant amount of power debuff on a forward. So yeah, having a forward's power generally makes it pretty worthless in terms of combat. Even like generally like larger guys at 9,000, 10,000, putting them down to 4,000 or 5,000 generally allows pretty much any forward to outfight them in combat. So Bismarck is pretty strong in that regard. So it is a stronger combat pump, and less situational than Choo Lane, but you do lose your EX burst from it. Not only that, you do have some flexibility in that you can do some other interesting things with it. So it says choose one monster, return it to its owner's hand. That can be your monsters or your opponent's monsters. So if your opponent is playing one of those larger monsters that does transform, then yeah, this is a good way to bounce it back. Yeah, to bounce it back for a little bit of tempo value. So that's one handy use for this card. Also, like any sort of auto trigger type abilities that might interrupt some of your forwards from coming into play or doing something, using that to bounce them back to their hand can give you a turn of freedom to like be uninterrupted. Choose one character you control, return it to its hand. That's also a pretty strong ability as well, especially for any forward or backup, or any monster as well, that has a very strong interplay ability that you want to be able to reuse. You can just pull back to your hand. The classical example is Shantoto, but if you're playing a water earth deck, then yeah, putting something like Raban back to your hand is also pretty solid as well. And also because it's a summon, you can use it in response to stuff. So if your opponent is using some sort of removal ability to destroy one of your forwards, such as, let's say, if you happen to have a Ash on the field, and your opponent has one of the few options available to destroy your forward, you can always use Bismarck in response to return that Ash or to return whatever card back to your hand. So yeah, Bismarck is actually a very, very flexible card, and the fact that if you like combine it with Rare Yuna, the backup that reduces water summons by 1, it becomes a 1-cost summon. So it's a very, very powerful summon at 1 cost. It allows you to basically win any sort of combat and allows you to return forwards and monsters. So it's a very, very strong summon. Yeah, I'm definitely going to try this in my mono water decks, and I think it's going to be very strong card. Yeah. Next we have Celestia. It is a 2-cost backup. When a party you control attacks, all forwards in that party gains plus 1,000 power until the end of the turn. So we spoke a little bit earlier about Andoria that buffs you guys from party attacking, or will reward you for successfully dealing opponent damage from party attacking. Celestia is a card that rewards you for forming a party. So yeah, so this card, like, yeah, giving you guys plus 1,000 power. So yes, for a 2-cost backup to give you guys plus 1,000 power, that's actually pretty cost efficient. That being said, though, I don't think there's really a need for this card. So typically when you do party attack with your forwards, most of your forwards are probably going to be around like 1 or 2,000 below your opponent's forward, right? But when they party together, generally they're going to have a power that's significantly above their opponent's forward. So like a typical example is like you have 2 7Ks against your opponent's 9K or your opponent's 8K. If you party attack with your 2 7Ks, giving them plus 1,000 power doesn't really make a difference. Your opponent's blocking forward is generally only going to be able to destroy one of your attacking forwards anyway. So even with this plus 1,000 power buff, it doesn't really sort of benefit your party attack all that much. And any sort of situation when you're party attacking and you need this plus 1,000 to trade, that puts you in a very, very risky situation. Where your opponent's defending blocker can wipe out both of your attackers, and yeah, if they're able to buff or debuff, they're able to just completely win the fight. So Celestia is not one of those backups you really want to rely on when you're party attacking, and typically when you're party attacking, you're generally going to be stronger than your opponent's defenders anyway. So because of that, I don't really think that this card really sort of has that much use, even in a deck that seems to be more party attack focused. Next, we got the second water legendary of the set. It is Porum. It is a 4-cost forward at 5,000 power, so it's below the curve, but it's got EX Burst. When Porum enters the field, look at the top 3 cards of your deck, add 1 card among them to your hand, and return the others to the bottom of your deck in any order. So effectively, it becomes a 2 CP forward because it does get you a card back. It's also got another ability of 1 dull, choose 1 action ability, and cancel its effect. So an action ability is any of those abilities that have the ellipses, so it's any of those payment ... effect type abilities. So yeah, you can cancel those effects. You can't cancel special abilities because special abilities aren't action abilities. But otherwise, it's pretty strong. In terms of action abilities, yeah, it's actually a pretty cost efficient way to do this. And there's not many cards in the game at all that have the ability to stop action abilities. So it's actually pretty strong and potent effect. It definitely seems like a very strong control card in that it is it's a way to cycle through your deck to search for cards, as well as it's got a pretty strong control aspect to it. Its body isn't particularly strong, although 5,000 isn't like so terrible where it just instantly loses every fight. There are ways that you can buff it so it can like do all right in fights. So it's not terrible. Yeah, in terms of its size, and with all the water buffs and the water debuffs, it can potentially stop some sort of more mid-ranger sort of forwards as well. But yeah, so this definitely seems like a more like controller type card. If you have a legendary water cecil to protect it, then this card's going to be very, very strong, and it is going to penalize your opponent for using action abilities, especially backup type action abilities, which are quite expensive to use. So yeah, that being said though, in more sort of mid-ranger water decks, I don't think that this card really has much use, because water already has quite a lot of forwards that typically are very good at searching and have very good value. Water has amongst some of the best 3-cost forwards in the game. And yeah, so like typically for a more mid-ranger sort of water deck, I don't think Porum is really going to see play because it's going to get sort of pushed out a little bit from all the other great water 3-cost forwards. But yeah, in a sort of more controller heavier water type build, potentially I could see 1 or 2 Porums as a cycle card, and also just as a good protection card as well. Next, we got Flintlock. It is a 2-cost backup. Dull, choose 1 forward. It doesn't receive damage that's less than its power this turn. So effectively, it provides a temporary Minwu type ability to a forward. So yeah. So Minwu has always been one of the strongest cards in water. It makes every fire deck, it makes every lightning deck really struggle much harder with this element. And yeah, and it's a 2 CP backup. Now, like, yeah, so typically most water decks, if they're running Minwu, they're typically running 2 copies to deal with those matchups. Flintlock is just basically kind of useless in that like water already has a very powerful backup already that fulfills a similar type ability. And yeah, so the benefit is that it is a 2-cost backup, so you can play it very efficiently for only 1 discard. But the issue is that it doesn't give continuous protection, and so for abilities that are AoE type abilities, it doesn't protect against that. Or typically it can really sort of protect 1 forward from an AoE type ability. And otherwise, there are ways that your opponent can respond to stuff. So if your opponent is dealing a small pack of damage and you use Flintlock in response, if your opponent then deals a larger pack of damage or deals another pack of damage in response to that, it will still resolve before Flintlock, and it will take those small ping packets amount of damage. So Flintlock is actually significantly more weaker than Minwu, and because of that, I would not recommend using this over Minwu. Next, we've got Green Mage. It is a 2-cost backup, and this is a backup that I'm really excited to try out. So for Dull, put Green Mage in Break Zone, choose 1 action ability, cancel its effect. So yeah, canceling action abilities is actually really strong, and this is a 2-cost backup that also requires no CP in order to use its ability. You just have to dull it and break it to cancel an action ability. So there's a lot of action abilities in this game, and like especially the more powerful like backup type action abilities, canceling them is very good. And like also like especially with cards like Zemus being in this set, if your opponent spends a large amount of CP to use an action ability, you can very efficiently stop those abilities. So Green Mage is very good. It's a 2-cost backup, and it's got a lot of control potential as well. So yeah, this card I'm really excited for, and I'm really looking forward to using this card. I think it's very good. I think definitely Water Deck should try out at least 1 or 2 copies of this card. Next, we got Mughal Knight. It is a 3-cost forward, 7,000 power. 3-cost, 7,000 power forward. For water, Mughal Knight doesn't receive any damage from your opponent's summons or abilities this turn. So yeah, so we spoke about a card called Y'shtola a little bit earlier in our videos. And yeah, being a forward that can't receive any damage from someone's ability is actually a really strong ability. And Mughal Knight can sort of pick up that ability by just paying 1 water. So yes, it is. Yes, it is more inferior to to your Stolar's ability in that you have to pay for it and trigger it. But this card does get some bonus points for being a standard unit. And so being a free cost forward, 7,000 power is also pretty solid on its body, and yeah, making it immune to summon or ability damage is pretty solid. Now the thing is that typically water does run Minwu, so smaller packets of damage you're going to be immune to anyway. So the value of this ability is that if your opponent has a card that has that deals a large packet of damage, then Mughal Knight can prevent that. So if your opponent uses something like a Bahamut or like any sort of those large packets, large amounts of damage type abilities, then Mughal Knight can protect that. That being said, though, there's not many colors that can do large packs of damage. Typically, fire is going to be the only one. Occasionally, wind can do a large packet amount of damage as well. Lightning generally doesn't do like large packets of damage. It tends to do more multiple more mid-range sort of packs of damage, in which case Minwu already protects your guy. So Mughal Knight kind of has an ability that water already has quite a lot of good protection against already. And its ability only adds a very small niche sort of benefit to this card. So because of that, this card is not inherently bad, but because water already has so many cards are already protected from similar type abilities, this isn't what water needs. Next, we got Leviathan, one of the new water summons for this set, and yet again another Leviathan. It's a 1-cost summon, EX Burst. Choose 1 forward. If its cost is equal or less than the number of cards in your hands, return it to its owner's hand. So first of all, it can choose both your opponent and your forwards. Potentially in certain situations where you do want to protect it forward or reuse a forward, you can do that as well. It does cost 1 CP, which if you have a rare Yuna, which reduces the cost of water summons by 1, it doesn't reduce Leviathan down to 0 CP. It has to still stay at 1 CP, so that is a consideration. The fact that it can only return a forward that's cost equal less than the number of cards in your hand is a consideration. That this card is much better as a proactive play than a reactive play. Because typically a reactive play is something that your opponent does, and on their turn you want to use Leviathan. Typically you don't have that many backups open, and you generally have less cards in hand because typically if you were to use this on your turn, you just drew 2 extra cards. So Leviathan is going to be much more powerful on your turn after you drew 2 cards than on your opponent's turn, where you typically have less cards in your hand. So it's much more of a proactive card than a reactive card. That being said, though, this card also is a little bit inconsistent. So where the free cost Leviathan tends to be much better when it returns a larger forward, because you are getting so you are forcing your opponent to spend a lot more CP to get those forwards back into play. Leviathan finds it much more difficult to return larger forwards. So I really sort of foresee this card returning forwards that cost 3 or less, potentially 4 as well. Anything that costs 4 or 5 is going to be a real big struggle for Leviathan to bounce. A lot of times you will happen to have maybe around 3 to 4 cards in hand, and so Leviathan isn't going to be able to bounce a large forward unless you're holding all the cards back in your hand. So because of that, this card can have a lot of potential to just be dead. And typically the forwards that you're going to want to bounce and the forwards that are going to be most problematic are going to be those forwards that cost a lot as well. So because of that, I think that this card on paper is has a interesting use, but I think in actuality, in actual play, it's the user's going to find it a little bit difficult to use this card effectively. Next, we got Fischer. It is a 2-cost backup for water 1 dull break. We'll put Fischer into a break zone. Choose 1 monster that costs 3 or less from your break zone. Play it onto the field. You can only use this ability during your turn. So of course any card that can return cards from your break zone back on the field are going to be strong cards, and this card allows you to do it at a pretty reasonable cost as well, because if you are getting a free cost monster, you're paying your free CP up front, and then you're dull breaking this back up. So you're generally not really sort of overpaying for your monster. So you're not really sort of overpaying for the effect. Having a 2 CP backup means that you can play it early on with 1 discard. Now, the one big valuable thing about this card is that even though it can only be done during your turn, you can do it during your combat. And this combos with Tom Breeze very well, in the sense that one of the biggest issues with Tom Breeze previously was that when you put a Tom Breeze down, you're able to reduce a forward by 2,000 power. So generally, if you were to use this before combat, you reduce opponent's forward by 2,000 power, and generally your opponent's forward isn't going to be blocking you anymore. They'll generally allow 1 or 2 forwards to slip through rather than to have their forward lose combat straight away. The strength of Fischer is that you can attack with your forward and then use its ability to break during combat after your opponent's declared a block to put Tomberries in, so you get value out of that interplay ability. So yeah, so in that regard, like, it's actually pretty strong in that it allows you to play Tomberries mid combat. And yeah, and that's going to be the biggest value. Any other monster that have similar sort of interplay like type effects, Fischer is going to do very well with. Of course, any free cost monster, that's it's just going to be good value. So Fischer, definitely in the water monsters deck, I think has a very good place, and being able to return Tomberries mid combat is going to be a very, very powerful play that water decks are going to have available with this backup. Next, we have Raffi. It's the Water Warrior of Light. It is a free cost 7,000 power forward, just like all the other Warrior of Lights. Gives all your Water and Warrior of, and Job Warrior of Light forwards plus 1,000 power. Dull a total of 5 active water forwards or water backups. Choose one forward your opponent controls. Return it to its owner's hand. So we have spoken about this a little bit earlier because it is in one of our earlier spoilers. So this card is very good. Yeah, giving your guys and your Warrior Lights plus 1,000 power is just very, very welcome. It's a forward that's on curve, and returning a forward to your opponent's hand using a renewable type ability is actually very good. Even though like you have to like dull 5 active water forwards or backups, it is actually quite a reasonable cost, and especially because water happens to have a lot of ways to put a lot of forwards onto field in the form of like Lena or in the form of like FF9 cards. You're typically going to be able to trigger off this ability pretty easily. And yeah, and so like also if you happen to have 5 backups, you can always just tap 1 backup, discard a card to put the Raffi into play, and you still have 5 active water forwards or backups to use to bounce one of your opponent's forward. So that's a very good tempo play as well. So if you happen to have a couple of guys on the field and your opponent has a big blocker, tap 1 CP, discard a card, put Raffi in, tap 4 backups and Raffi, and then bounce one of your opponent's forwards, and then you swing in with your guys. And yeah, you've only spent 1 card and you've put a forward onto the field by doing this as well. So yeah, so this card is very solid, and also especially in water because like it's got Aria as a Warrior of Light support, and also because water has in the past played a Warrior Light in certain decks as well, because Warrior of Light's ability does synergize really well with Minwu. So Raffi, Warrior of Light, and Minwu are a very strong combination, and yeah, it's definitely a reason to try out Raffi, and yeah, definitely a reason to try out Warrior of Light as well in the new Mono Water deck. Next, we got Rosa. It is a 4-cost forward at 5,000 power, so it's below the curve, but EX burst. When Rosa enters the field, you may search for a card named Cecil and add it to your hand. So there are a lot of Cecils in this game. So between Earth and Water, there are like a huge handful of Cecils, especially like the new Legendary Cecil as well. Yeah, and it's also got a secondary ability of choose 1 forward. So for Dull, choose 1 forward. During this turn, the next damage dealt to it is reduced by 1,000 instead. If the forward is a card named Cecil, during this turn, the next damage dealt to it is reduced by 3,000 instead. So obviously, this is a card that's used to combo with Cecil. Because of its protection abilities, I do think its ability is typically going to be something that you want to use with the Opus 2 Legendary Cecil, because that Cecil is going to be able to protect your Rosa from damage abilities to remove her, and Rosa is going to be able to protect Cecil from combat damage as well. So yeah, I think that's probably one of the best go-to synergies. But that being said, Rosa can definitely be used in the new Legendary Cecil deck, where to search for the new Legendary Cecil. And because Water Aura has a couple of cards that do get benefits from receiving damage, such as Legendary Steiner, I like Water Earth like self-damage deck is potentially a deck that I want to try in the near future, and I think it's a very viable archetype. Next, we got Orator. It's a 2-cost forward at 5,000 power, so it's on curve. It's a standard unit. Dull, choose 1 forward, select a job. It gains that job until the end of the turn. Besides from very, 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 very niche situations, I don't think that this card is going to see any sort of use. Yes, you can use it in certain situations, such as with the 3-cost legendary bots to add an additional job onto the field. That being said, though, like in a lot of cases, you're probably, it feels like you're better off just playing a forward that fits that job already, rather than playing a pretty mediocre forward, hoping it survives until the next turn, and then using its ability to gain an extra job. So this is just like one of those fun gimmicky cards. There might be some fun things that you can do with it, but yeah, giving it a certain job is a very limited type ability. So yeah, I'm not super excited to try out this card. Although it does, it being in Final Fantasy Tactics does allow you to do some very interesting things with it. Because yeah, so like the Opus 3 Legendary Ramza gets increased power from Tactics cards, but it's also a Knight, so you can potentially chuck it into a Water Lightning Knight deck that uses Opus 3 Ramza. It gets a buff from Orator, and then Orator can give some of your other Tactics forwards that may not be Knights the Knights trigger, so you can get interesting Knight buffs as well. But yeah, so like fun little gimmicky things like that, but it's not a very consistent ability, and it's not on a very impressive forward as well. So that being said, it is one of those cards that's more for fun than for competitive play. But yeah, there definitely are some very interesting fun things you can do with it. Next, we got another Orator. It's a 2-cost backup this time. So dull, put Orator into Break Zone. Choose one monster you control, return to its owner's hand. So this is basically a Scholar for monsters. I don't think that this card is really needed. There's already a couple of cards that can return your monsters back to your hand in the form of cards like Bismarck, or in the cards in the form of something like Schrodinger. Maybe not Schrodinger yet. So something in the form of Bismarck, or something in the form of like Fischer. There are plenty of ways to get monsters back. I don't really think Orator is really needed, and its ability it's pretty narrow by itself. So because of that, yeah, I don't think that this card is really needed, because there already happens to have quite a lot of good monster support in Water already. And that's it for all the Water cards for Opus 5. Yeah. Drop back in next day or two as we go through the light and dark cards, and then after that we'll be talking about the new starter deck cards of Opus 5, and then we can get started on some fun new interesting decks for you guys to see. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you guys have some feedback or some comments, definitely put them in the comment section below. I do respond to you guys. If there are any cards that you think I might have overlooked or underrated, definitely let me know in the comment section. We'll have a little discussion. And if you guys enjoyed this video, please thumbs up and subscribe. It helps out with the YouTube algorithms. Otherwise, I'll catch you guys later. Grand J out.